It's really lovely to have everyone joining us this evening and in this week of this International Women's Week 2021 or month. And what this time of year is usually about, hopefully, is positive stories, inspirational stories, courageous stories, words about people being successful, being tenacious, or being generally awesome. And so we wanted this discussion today to be a forward-looking one about the future and about the amazing young women that we want to see succeed in the future in our industry. My name is Mandy Kirby. I'm Chief Strategist at Hive. We are an organisation that partners with companies in the investment management industry, helping them to meet their sustainability responsibilities through our diverse, equitable and inclusive corporate culture. And I've got three brilliant people joining me for the discussion today. They're going to talk about their own experiences very much through the lens of the things that we can change today to make the path smoother for the people that are following, but also the things that we can learn and the energy and the fresh perspective that those people are going to bring, and that we can maybe help channel ourselves. So those people are my lovely co-founder, business partner, Bev Shah, CEO of Hive, Charlotte Young, who is one of the founders of GAIN, Girls of Investors, and an investment management at Troy Asset Management, and Mona Shah, who's a director at Stonehage Fleming Investment Management, and she is a supporter of both Hive and GAIN. So thank you very much to everyone for joining us, and looking forward to a great discussion. So the theme of International Women's Day 2021 is Choose to Challenge. And I think for Hive, that means two things. One is a challenge to the industry to do more to ensure that the talent pipeline that we've got coming through is supported, and that the pipeline is diverse, and that there are measures there that ensure that it's equitable and that it will sustain our industry in the future. And we believe that the biggest impact that can happen there is if we work collaboratively, if we have collective voice. And so we're very happy to be working with GAIN on this. And the second way, I think, is that we choose to challenge ourselves. And the way that we've done that this year is that we have had GAIN do a takeover on our website and our journal, and they are sharing experiences and some really wonderful stories that I would encourage everyone to go and have a look at when you have a moment. And I'm just going to ask Charlotte if you could say a little bit about that and about GAIN.
Yeah, sure. So for those of you who don't know, GAIN, delighted to be working with Hive on this. We're a charity set up a couple of years ago to address the application piece of gender diversity, so really to inspire that next generation of female investors to apply for jobs in the industry. And we're set up by a group of us who really love our jobs. Perhaps our greatest contention is that there aren't enough women alongside us. So really trying to inform that next generation and provide the role models with which to infuse and inspire them to apply. And kind of part of what we do in order to get that attention of students is we have really impressive ambassadors on the ground across 33 universities in the UK. So we've got a really good student reach, and 4 of these ambassadors are pictured here. These are some of the most professional 20, 21-year-olds you will ever encounter. They are already fully bought into investment as a career, and they do a really fantastic job for us in telling their peers about it and promoting GAIN events. And what's been brilliant in the last week and the weeks following is that Hive have just fantastically invited us to collaborate for International Women's Week. And these ambassadors have written about their experiences on the website, I think, all incredibly inspiring. It gives me great hope for the years to come that we're going to have some serious female talent in investment. So I would encourage you to go and read their stories, but huge thanks to Hive. This kind of just shows, and GAIN, we harness, we really are privileged to be able to harness the goodwill and the huge motivation of hundreds of women now in our network who are investors and who really want to choose the challenge. They really want to drive change. And part of that is just working together. It's amazing how much you can get done when you just get a really excellent group of motivated and intelligent women in the same room. So I think just working with City Hive just shows how we push that even further than Gain Zone Network. So thank you to both Mandy and Bev for everything you've done with us.
It's an absolute pleasure. We had a little bit of tear in our eye, didn't we, when we were reading them? They're very moving stories, and yeah, as you said, very motivated young women. Amazing. So with that, we'll crack on with our panel discussion. And I think the first thing that I'm going to say is that I don't think that women sit comfortably in the board environment. Charlotte, what would be your take? Oh, I think you're on mute, Charlotte.
Apologies, I was on mute, which is exactly proof to the point that women on digital, perhaps we're not quite up to scratch with that. But there's also, really the fact that there aren't that many women with the right credentials and the depth of experience to sit on boards. The issues covered in boards are extremely complex.
In my experience, most women don't want the hassle or pressure of sitting on a board.
Interesting take. And Mona?
Shareholders just aren't that interested in the makeup of the board, so why should we be?
Indeed. Now, some of you might be familiar with these quotes. They came from the Hampton Alexander Review in 2018, genuine quotes about the reasons that women are not being appointed to the very top tier of the industry. And I think they're helpful because they do let us know the scale of the mountain that we have to climb. But I also think that if I was a younger person, I would be some combination of confused, enraged, and a little bit discouraged to see those types of comments. And I think if I was a woman thinking about entering the industry, it would make me think twice about whether or not my talents were going to be welcomed. So with these types of quotes, there's an excellent set of 10 there, and with these ringing in our ears, I'd like to ask the panel to talk a little bit about their own experiences and to try and put a bit of a positive spin on it, because we are in a positive mood, and to talk a little bit about how they've reflected on their experiences and maybe the things that they would have done differently if they'd had the opportunity to. So maybe Charlotte, if I can come to you first, and if we talk a little bit about your experience of coming into the industry and things that you thought were kind of green or red flags about organisations, and maybe things that you would have asked this time around if you had that time again.
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think you've got to be strategic about from the very first moment you put pen to paper or fingers to the keypad in terms of applying to firms. There are hundreds of investment firms out there, and you've only got so many hours in the day. You should apply to as many that you can find that you think are going to be successful in the future and that are going to align with your values. And I would suggest that everyone on this call is very much with a view to being part of an organisation that's inclusive and progressive and adaptive, really aware of the change that needs to happen in our industry. And for that reason, that is totally compatible. In fact, it's completely inextricably linked with firms that are also going to be successful. Firms that are inclusive by their nature will have better decision making. They will have stronger discussions and debates, and they will be better investors. So really what I would encourage you to do from the outset of applying is find those firms which you can see as being on that front foot, moving in the right direction and fast enough. And this is sort of when I look at a company that we might invest in, it's exactly the same. So, look at which senior women they have, what board level representation of diversity, at the executive level, are there senior women in positions of responsibility? But don't expect it to be 50-50, because this is the problem with our industry today, is that there is a widespread and pretty endemic issue with diversity. What you want to find is a firm which is changing and which is on that journey already, and self-reflective enough and self-critical enough to understand that action needs to be taken, and then proactive in making those steps. So I would really encourage you to look at firms that are engaging with organisations, and I am slightly biased, but I think this is a fair tip to say any firm that is working with City Hive or working with Gain has clearly thought about this, and is putting their money and their action where their mouth is, and frankly where the world is going. So that's a great start. But there are also sort of subtler ways that I find quite helpful to understand a firm's culture and a firm's sort of willingness to critique itself. And if you look at the investment reports, for example, of a firm and how they reflect upon their decision making, you can straight away sense that whether there's a humility there, or whether there's a complete reluctance to acknowledge wrong decisions. And if there is this clear reflection of, actually, we got this wrong and this is how we can improve, then that is likely to be applicable not only to that investment part, but also to the culture of the firm generally, and moving towards being more inclusive and diverse. I think that's really key. So that's sort of before you get to interview. And I think, looking back at my decision making, I actually, I think I just got lucky. I didn't think about this consciously at the time, but I am part of a firm which does both of those things. It thinks about, really reflects on past decisions made and how we can make them better, not just on the investment side, but also elsewhere. So when you're in interview, I think a really good question to ask, because this is a key part of the change and everyone getting their feet in the door so that we can just blow those doors off, is ask about those channels of communication between the junior members of the investment team and the more senior members, and how that communication flows. Is there enough challenge? How do you ensure that there is? And therefore, that will be indicative of a firm that really invites every voice to come to the table and has an inclusive process. I think that's something that now I'm part of. I'm grateful, but I think I just got a bit lucky. So I'd recommend asking that in an interview.
Yeah, lots of excellent points in there. Bev, maybe you can chime in.
So I joined the city like I suppose the tech revolution, where you'd be able to do lots of online research. Websites were pretty poor. You didn't have amazing websites like Glassdoor, which can be very revealing about an organisation. So when I reflect back on my career, I really wish I'd stopped to think about the fit of the organisation and used the interview itself as a marker of whether I would fit the organisation and, in fact, the team that was interviewing me. Because often you can have a great organisation, particularly if they're a really large one, they will have great missions, but they aren't always as joined up, and you're going to be joining a team. So it's very much about remembering that it's not just one-sided. It's not, because when I was interviewing, I was always thinking, God, I need a job and I need the money and I want to buy things and I want to, I wasn't thinking about mortgage, I was thinking about shiny shoes. And I was looking forward. I wasn't planning and thinking, actually, what's going to happen when I get this job with this absolute dick who's interviewing me? And then you end up in a job where you're not very happy, even if the organisation is great. So thinking about that stuff, and that means actually having value in yourself. It's remembering that you're bringing something to the table. You might be more junior, but that doesn't matter. You can learn. You're bright. You're at university. And I suppose the analogy I'd like to put this to, and I have no idea about this either, because I've been married for 15 years and I met my husband in the pre-Tinder days. But I think it's a little bit like that. You kind of look at the pictures and keep swiping, and they look very handsome and lots of six packs and all the rest of it. And that's probably a little bit like the research that Charlotte's telling you to do. It's kind of have a look and see if it's what you like. But then you go on the date, and it might be the coffee date, the one on the Sunday afternoon where you're not really going to commit because you're going to spend an hour. And that's the conversations you start to have with people who maybe work in the organisation, the first interview. But really, the nuts and bolts of it come when you get through those initial rounds and you're going through the really long rounds of interviews, and you're deciding whether you want to work there. Because in our industry, one of the positives, I suppose, is a lot of these organisations have a problem, is they're missing out on cognitive diversity from women and other diverse groups. So just remember to value yourself. And I can't stop laughing at this picture on the screen of that whole idea of like having the right face. You don't need to worry about that. I would say be yourself, because you're going to have to go into that organisation every day as yourself. And if they don't like you the way you are in an interview, then you maybe aren't going to be the right person for them. So that's kind of my take on it, which is maybe a little bit looking back on my career.
Yeah, and I think it's also a bit through the lens of I wouldn't want to be navigating the job market for the first time right now, and I think that the conditions might be quite scary for people. But I also think that a lot of young people, they might carry ideas into the workplace that they think is what they're expecting, and then they find that it's not what they're expecting, but they don't have a good workplace to measure it up against. So some of the bad practices, the kind of toxic work culture that is in place in some organizations, is just going to kind of fall around them. They might not know what good looks like. And if, Charlotte, you've been lucky enough to find a place where you've realized that it's a good environment, it's an enabling environment. But I don't think that that's always apparent, particularly when things have gone the other way and kind of badly wrong. And so
also, I think when you're starting your career anyway, everything looks really shiny and new, and it's only as life starts to happen, you suddenly realise what you actually want. And maybe it's not the shiny shoes. Sorry.
It's the biscuits, the good biscuits. I think that's what I miss most of all about being in offices and conference rooms. So with that in mind, what types of good working practices can we try and identify? And maybe also thinking, I do take your point, Bev, about needing to be authentic and finding a workplace that is right for you. But I think that can be challenging if you feel like you're one of a kind, or you're on your own in the workplace. So can we talk a bit about good working practices? But can we also talk a little bit about looking for support and allies? And Mona, maybe you could come in there.
Yeah, so, well, in terms of good working practices, I think for many people, if they haven't worked somewhere before, they probably should have asked themselves some questions about who they are. Do they get more work done in the morning or at night? Do they like working in a team? What really brings out the best of their skill set? And those are really good questions to inform the questions that you ask your potential workplace about how you'll fit in culturally in terms of those good working practices. And absolutely don't be afraid to challenge them. Now, forming allies can be a slightly more difficult one, but I would say I've always gone by build an ally at every level of a company, from the top to the very bottom, and have an ally in every single department and in every single global office. And okay, that's probably quite a lot of coffees, but you're probably going to drink that coffee anyway, so you may as well do it while bonding over someone and what kind of milk they have, for example. So I would say actually building allies is a systematic process and should be done in the same way that you write your formulas into a spreadsheet: systematized, methodical, build the best ones.
That's exactly what I would expect you to say. make it systematic, get a spreadsheet. And So we're going to talk a little bit about networks in a minute, but in terms of when you say you talked a bit about the individual and what would work for them individually, but what kind of things, what about team working practices? How can you recognize a kind of supportive and enabling team environment?
Just basic things in terms of, do people show up to a team working meeting having done a bit of homework before? Is there an agenda or is there not? Just quite simply, are people set up for success or not? Because if they're not, then frankly you're all doomed, you're all going to fail. So therein lies an amazing opportunity. You won't believe the career path I've built for myself just by writing agendas and sometimes writing minutes as well. And there's nothing bad about that. Writing minutes puts you right in the fore. It's the most powerful place to be. So yeah, you just be really clear about what you're there to do, and be really clear about what your strengths and weaknesses are, and make best friends with those who have the opposite strengths to yours. That I should have added that into the bit about have a friend in every department, in every office, at every level. Yeah, add that too, and they're amazing at everything you're crap at.
Amazing. So subverting administrative tasks to empower us. And Charlotte, any advice?
Yeah. Oh, I agree with all of that, and hadn't really properly considered the power of minute taking until now. So bear that in mind. I completely agree with the complementarity of someone in your team is so key. And this is when you're hiring and when you're joining, just think about how you fit in, what you bring to the table. I guess I remember some really memorable advice that I was given probably 2 years into my career, which going to another job, and it was, keep talking about working practices. The advice was to keep quiet the first 2 years and just absorb everything. And the latter part was good advice. The former, just to keep completely quiet. I mean, I like this call out iniquity bullet because I think that's quite important. So I think there's a balance to be struck. You want to be diplomatic. You want to be sensitive to the culture of a firm, how things work before you start throwing your weight around. And to do that, to find out how things do work, it takes a long time if you don't have allies. So to Mona's point, speak to as many people as you can to really understand how decisions work and how politics function. But once you do have that network and have that understanding, don't keep quiet for the first 2 years. Ask questions, ask for advice, and challenge. I think the best thing that any firm can harness is the perspective of someone who's new, who's potentially from a different background, different experience, different demographic, different age. I just think really bring your voice once you've understood the most effective way to communicate and to work cohesively with the existing structures.
And I think that brings us nicely on to networking. And I do genuinely believe that working collaboratively is the future, and we can draw parallels with the world of sustainability, for example, where you've had a multitude of people working together to achieve something which is, it's going to benefit more than just them personally. It's going to benefit a lot of people. And you do, just to make a sweeping generalization, often see women able to work very collaboratively, but they're both kind of expected to do it, but also penalized from it because they're sort of seen less as leaders, because leaders are the ones that fall ahead and make decisions by themselves. So with that in mind, and accepting that this is the way forward, I still hate networking. So how do we actually build up the kind of the energy and the courage to go and ask for the coffee, and what kind of how do we make the introductions? What are the questions we should be asking? How can we make it worthwhile of the other person's time as well? Bev, I think this is one thing.
Well, it's safe to say that I don't think I would have been able to even get City Hive to where it is without having had a huge network in my career. And it was a little bit of what Charlotte and Mona have said earlier, apart from the bit about keeping quiet, because as well, Mandy knows very well, and so does Mona, that is something I find very difficult, which is rare for the city, but that's why I was always a great analyst, because I asked questions. So I didn't have a spreadsheet. So my starting gambit was I'd go on conference, and actually was where I first met Mona. They give you a kind of list of people who were there, and I systematically went and spoke to everybody, ticking off who I spoke to. So I hadn't kept a spreadsheet, but what I'd done is, for every business card they'd given me, is I jotted some information down, because often you can walk away from an event and have lots of cards from lots of people, but you don't really know how and what the conversation was. I also don't think about networking as networking. I just see it as going out to a party or something. You know, when you walk into a room, if it's a friend's birthday, you don't know anyone else there, you just go up to people and you talk to them, and you're yourself. And I think one thing that happens in the city and in a lot of professional environments is that people put a barrier up, and they think they need to be a different person. They think they need to wear a professional mask, but we are human beings, and human beings are social creatures. We like to connect with people on a personal level. You know, I'm not saying you need to go into a room with lots of senior people and go and become best friends with them, but it's okay to ask them personal questions. You know, it's okay to bring things to a human level. It's really important to remember that the reason they're in a senior position is probably some of it's biology, because they're older than you, so they've obviously got on the career path before you, but at the end of the day we all put our trousers on the same. So it's remembering that we're all humans. That's the best way, I think, in order to start building your network. Then the second thing is don't straight away think, what can I get from that person? You know, be really strategic about what you're going to be asking that person, if you are asking for that coffee or you are asking for their time, because executive time and people's time up the ladder is often really precious. Like, my diary is back to back, and I keep slots to talk to people, but when I do meet people in my network, I really want to know before we meet, what is it they want? It's not, you know, necessarily something commercial. It could be just advice they want or whatever, but I really want to know what they want. I don't want just to catch up. Which is really, really key, is know what you want. And those people that have done that with me, and I've done that with them, we've actually had a longer relationship. I don't look at, you know, other people, I look at their kind of requests, and I think, oh, you know, I don't know what they want, and they're just using up my time. When I talk in public, I often talk about how I got into the city, which is my life is one big movie sketch, and trading places was the reason why I joined the city, but actually networking I learned from the film Working Girl because there's a great scene in it where Sigourney Weaver says to Melanie Griffiths, when she's just kind of pushed away some kind of slimeball guy at an office party, and she says, never burn bridges, because today's junior prick is tomorrow's senior partner. And that was my mantra. And it wasn't this idea that everyone I met was a junior prick, but just don't burn bridges. Like, you might not gel with someone, you might not like them, but that's just like life. You don't know when you're going to meet with them. And actually, people in the city or anywhere, we're all different. We've all got different personalities, and you just got to remember that. So that would kind of be my take on actually building a network. And you start that from the day you walk in the door. And if you're a graduate, all those graduates around you are going to be going up the ladder, and you're going to know them. I mean, I still know the people I started with 20 years ago, you know, and they've kind of expanded across. So that's my take on it.
I will give a very sort of personal local parallel for people that think that you are, you know, just sort of the kind of enthusiastic person that can say things like that. You are the only person I know who is friends with the local traffic warden, and I have seen it in action
He's my friend.
And I say hello to him, but I'm not his friend.
You won't give me a ticket. But actually, what I just want to also say that when Charlotte said about finding people who are the opposites, this is why I love working with Mandy, because we are the opposite in our temperaments and skill sets.
Charlotte, do you have anything to bring in on networking?
Yeah, I think I'm naturally more of your ilk, Mandy, and that I personally find networking, particularly when I was sort of newer to the industry, slightly uncomfortable. I thought it was supposed to be Machiavellian. I thought it was supposed to be, right, I'm going to get all these business cards and get as much out of these contacts. And I really sat comfortably with me. I didn't want to do it, so I didn't really. But what I was doing without realizing was exactly what you said, Bev, which was finding those people that I just got on with, that had a sort of personal connection with. I just really admired people with integrity, not necessarily people that I wanted a job from, just frankly people that had a really inspiring approach to investing, or people who were just someone that I could see myself potentially being in a few years' time, and I just sort of gravitated towards. And I think it gets easier, particularly if you are of the shyer disposition, if you're part of something bigger that can form that bond between you and someone else. So you're not talking about my career or your career. You're talking about being part of a network like Hive, or being part of an organization like Gain. And I think what I've loved about just being part of Gain, which is, it's a real collective effort, is that anytime I'm meeting with someone, so this is how I met Mona, for example, it's not about trying to sell someone something or trying to, pick someone's brain on something particular, which is, in itself completely fine. But for me, I just love the fact that we're all working towards a common goal. And that can be just a great way to meet people. And particularly if you are a minority in an industry, which we all are, to really gravitate towards those people who are having a similar experience and create that solidarity is so powerful. And I think it's just made me feel like I have hundreds of female colleagues now, which is just incredible.
I think you have to put yourself out of your comfort zone sometimes. So with networking, so you can go and connect with people who look like you and sound like you and build that support network around you, which I think we all have amongst ourselves in this group here. Mona, when I first met you, you were the first Indian woman I'd seen who was an investment analyst, and we were both kind of gravitated to each other, but we were the only two who were there. Everyone else was majority white male. And that puts you out of your comfort zone. And in the city, you are going to end up in a lot of rooms where you are in a minority. If you are someone who is nervous around going up to people, and don't get me wrong, I might look like I'm happy doing it. I have lots of self-doubt and lots of things that, I walk away thinking, God, what does that person think of me? But if you just start practicing doing it, and, go up to one person, and then the next event go, right, my challenge is to go up to two people, you can build that confidence up around this stuff.
I was just reflecting. I just wanted to add that nobody becomes really, really senior because they know everything. They probably become really, really senior because they've found ways to check their flaws. So if you're not feeling really confident about networking, I would say definitely don't worry. I was one of those people, and there's a really beautiful expression from yoga that I really love. There was a yoga teacher that was famous for saying, my students are my teachers. And I really love that, because that's how I feel. Like, this is my 7th Zoom of the day, so I feel incredibly precious and angsty about my diary. But I want to talk to people who I can learn from, and they are of all ages. So when someone messages me and says, oh, I want to have coffee, and it's just for the sake of having coffee, that's less interesting than when someone says to me, oh, I've just done a research project on the hydrogen sector, or I've just read some really interesting articles on Saudi Arabia, and I'd love to talk to you about them. That is wonderful for me. That's a really enriching conversation. That's stuff I don't know about.
Yeah. And I think that also brings us quite nicely to diversity. Diversity of thought, as well as background and representation and so on. And I think this is also an area that's particularly interesting if we think about younger perspectives, because it's probably fair to say that younger people who are coming into the industry will be surrounded by a lot more diversity in their either their educational environment or in their lives, and then they might find themselves coming into an industry that isn't particularly diverse but is doing quite a good job at the moment of talking about diversity, and you know, we're kind of yet to see the fruits of the labor there, and the actual kind of outcomes, not just the chat. So and particularly thinking about, you know, coming from a diverse background and looking into somewhere where there's very little diversity in the authority roles that people are seeing, which we want to, I think, collectively say to people, you need to challenge that. And so, Mona, we talked a bit before about you looking for diversity both in your investment practice, but also in the people that you're bringing into your team. Tell us a bit about that.
Sure. Well, look, the academic evidence is frankly astounding that having more diverse teams leads to better profit, better revenues, and lower downside. So, you know, why wouldn't you want it? And I'm increasingly finding that my investors are also asking me to show them the diversity of the investments that I make, i.e., how many of the fund managers are female, diverse, etc., etc. So, sorry, Mandy, tell me your question again. How
are you looking for diversity in the teams that we've talked a bit about investment practice generally.
Yeah.
You're bringing into your teams?
Yeah, so you can get academic about it in terms of sort of cognitive diversity and personality by running something like Myers-Briggs versus your team if you want to, and that's certainly something that maybe some teams should consider when they're later down the line with hiring, if they've got too many of sort of one type of person. But I also just think just the simple steps of not being too prescriptive in terms of universities that people come from, degrees that they've got. I mean, the best analyst I ever had a history of art degree. She asked the best questions, she saw things in the most unique ways, and she got us to think about risk differently. And yeah, it was wonderful. So weirdly, in order to bring more diversity in many ways, I'm saying do less, restrict less.
And
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with what Mona said. I mean, like Mona, I used to be a funds researcher, so thousands and thousands of teams I've looked at and assessed, and it was always the demographic of the team. So it wasn't necessarily because there aren't that many women or ethnic minorities. It wasn't necessarily that split, but it was certainly some teams just had more quirky people. So it could have been, you know, the schools they'd gone to, the education they'd had, the things, what organizations are now looking for is actually people who don't fit the mold that they've created. And the reason, you know, they've created this mold previously within the city, I think it's a numbers game, because, you know, historically, the city has always been kind of in the 1980s, Champagne Charlie, greed is good, money, money, money. So it attracted lots of people from lots of places to come into, because it was a highly lucrative job for people to get. So then you had tens of thousands of people applying for jobs in the city, And it became very difficult for recruiters and firms to pick. I mean, I know 20 years ago when I was applying for through graduate milk rounds, there were, intern programs had 10,000 people joining and signing up. And how do you filter out people? So the city started to put in the filters around which universities you go to. It went from just being the red brick to Oxbridge only, or it would say, right, previously, actually, you could come into the city like 20 years ago with a history degree, but then you'd go off and you do something like the CFA. At the time it was called AIMA, and you would go and study it. Now they're like, well, no, forget it. Study it before you come, because again, they're trying to whittle down the numbers. But the unintended consequence of that has been that we've eroded the kind of cognitive pool that we had, and we've ended up with blind spots in decision making. And one of the reasons we wanted to do this event and called it Blow the Doors Off was because generations of women before us have, put their foot in the door and tried to open it for us. That's why at very senior positions on board level or within the industry, people who are, over 50, naming ages, but there aren't, if you look at the pyramid of ages and where women sit, there aren't that many women, and those women there are shouting about it, but they didn't have the vacuum of numbers that you have at the bottom right now through organizations like Gaines, and in the middle you've got people like us who've shoved our shoulders in. People like Mona, the ambassadors again, we've said, like, we will help you. And if you come into the city will change. But what we need you to do is to be the army that's going to kick that door in, absolutely blow it off. So we don't have to have events like this that, that old joke about International Women's Day, and then the man will say, well, what about Man's Day? And we all go, well, every day's a man's day. We won't have to have that joke, right? Because every day will be an equal day for everyone. And that's kind of the point around diversity. It's like, don't go into this thinking because everyone's telling you there aren't that many women or whatever, that you're not victims, you're not, a statistic around not being wanted. The industry is starting to understand why they need you. That still means you need to work hard. They still want the best people. This is not a free ride for anybody, but it's giving you an opportunity which you would never have had before, because they're starting to rethink how they recruit and how they set the workplace up. And that is the bit that I'm jealous of, that you coming into the industry now, if you're a young woman, the scaffolding is being put into place by organizations, the frameworks to support you. It's no longer going to be a dirty word to say I'm pregnant, or all of the things that have hampered women in the industry and put a target on our backs before have gone. Women in the middle are putting our shoulders in and saying no, and we're going to stop that for you. You need to make sure that you completely blow the doors off for the next generation, so it's totally flat.
Charlotte, just before I come to you, I just mentioned, if anyone's got any questions, please do put them in the chat. We'll be responding in a minute. Charlotte.
Thanks. Yeah, I agree with all of that, particularly on the potential versus the experience side. When we're hiring, it's just as much about how someone thinks as how many investment firms they've worked at before or what they did for their degree. I think the playing field is increasingly leveling out, and we're, as part of what we're doing for Gain is trying to give that head start to young women who perhaps wouldn't have had that access to internships or to training, or even these panel discussions like this one today and the ones we've been doing this week, just providing that information, which, if you don't know your uncle who was a fund manager back in the day, perhaps more young men might, you can gain access to that sort of insight. That's what we're trying to do. I think the other thing I would say when we're thinking about diversity on a team, it's not just about having the representation around the table, it's about empowering people to speak up and to be themselves. And I think a workplace that has the structures in place, and it's about this communication channel between the most junior person in the room and the most senior, that is absolutely key. And I'm sure most of you have read the Matthew Syed's Rebel Ideas book, but that just shows the danger when you have lots of different opinions and complementary skill sets involved, but the people who spot a problem are not incentivized to raise their hand. And I think that's really, really important.
Indeed. So, as I said, people are welcome to chime in with questions in the chat, but I would like you guys to maybe round up the discussion by saying some positive things about what you're going to challenge yourself to do with respect to helping the people that are coming in, but also maybe also just tell us a little bit about what's made you stay. What is it about the industry that you love? And then we've got a couple of other interesting questions and comments happening in the chat, which I will bring in. Who wants to go first?
I'll go first. So for me, I probably wouldn't be still here if I hadn't redefined my work, and as a result, my identity to be so aligned with ESG, environmental, social, and governance work when investing. And obviously within the social, a huge part of that is diversity. And so I feel really proud, frankly, that this is the first time that I'm approaching diversity, not just from a time perspective, volunteering, mentoring, etc., but also with financial capital, looking at the diversity, kudos and credibility, I suppose, of potential investments. And clearly those they don't have to be perfect, as Charlotte was saying, but those who've articulated a journey and are mindful of their progress, those are the ones who are most likely to get capital. So my relationship with diversity has really changed as a result, and probably feels more powerful.
Amazing. Bev, do you want to?
Yeah, so the reason I've stayed within investment management and actually set up City Hive to kind of help the industry change for the better, hopefully, and future-proof us, is because the investment management industry actually, what do? We don't, it's not about helping people get wealthier and increase their money. We secure the hopes and dreams of everybody who participates within the industry. I mean, our clients, the end clients, Mrs. Miggins, Joe taxi driver, we ensure people can live a really comfortable life to their end days through their pensions and their retirement plans. That's what we do. That's what I think our industry is really important, and what I've always loved about it, the end customer.
And we've got a bit of a debate hotting up in the chat section around imposter syndrome, and I wonder if anyone wants to comment on that. The question is, it seems like imposter syndrome is always associated with women, but there's already a disagreement there, that this is actually something that affects everybody. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, you go first.
Oh, I think
you go first. Yeah, I don't like. I think, as Terry's pointed out, sort of these gender generalizations are dangerous, and there are lots of women, I think, who probably don't feel it, and likewise lots of men who do. But I think something that men in general, very much in general, that I've come across have managed to do quite effectively is give a veneer of not feeling it and counteracting it. And it's something that I learned to do quite early on in meetings where, you're meeting with the chief executive of a FTSE 100 company, and you've got 2 years of investment experience under your belts, and really don't feel qualified to challenge them on strategy. And I would go through meetings at the start of my career saying absolutely nothing, because I thought I shouldn't be here. This is embarrassing for everybody. And actually, a colleague just took me aside and said, "This is unsustainable. You've got to ask a question." So I made it a sort of structure of the meeting that I was going to ask one of the first two questions. It was either going to be me asking first or second, and just forcing myself to do it. And actually, people say sort of fake it till you make it, but the sort of facade of looking confident engendered confidence in itself. It's having those mechanisms to force yourself beyond your comfort zone, and actually that just breeds confidence inherently. So I don't know whether men are sort of, they have the tricks to counter it, perhaps more fully formed, certainly at the start of their career. I observed that and then quickly tried to catch up.
And also kudos to the person who took you aside and gave you that advice, because I think that is certainly something that we can all do, is offer those little tips and insights to support the development of the people that we see coming up the ranks. Because, you know, those types of things can take you years to learn, or maybe you don't learn them and you realize too late that you should have been, especially if someone has deliberately told you not to say anything for the first 2 years of your working life. Some unhelpful advice happening there, but you were lucky enough that someone came and gave you that advice, that they could see that you had the potential. And I think that's certainly something that we can all kind of commit to doing, to finding those ways to help people out.
I agree with both Terry and Akeo on this. I think everybody has imposter syndrome regardless of gender, and I don't think it's necessarily about how we approach it. You've either gone away and learnt to overcome it, and once you understand it you can. But I think there is a big focus publicly to link it to women. It's almost like, well, this is the reason why women haven't succeeded up the ladder, is because they've got imposter syndrome. Like a lot of women's coaching or events focus on it for women, and men do often get missed off the list because they aren't seen to be a problem in the demographic percentages. So it's, so I agree with both of their comments. It is always associated with women, but actually men have it just as badly. It's human nature, actually. Everybody has it. It's full stop,
And that's really important. Your point on how it's human nature, because I've done a lot of, obviously I'm a geek, so as you'd expect, I've done a lot of research around imposter syndrome, and so much of this does really live in neuroscience, and it goes way back to the cavemen, when they lived at a higher state of alert because there was more likely to be danger, and when that danger was present, it was really bad. Like, you might die, or you might lose all your animals or something. So people lived at a slightly high or materially higher state of alert. And obviously we don't have that anymore. We don't have to worry so much about leaving our houses and going to the supermarket. There's probably not too much danger we're going to meet along the way. But it seems like evolution hasn't caught up with that. And so we still have these voices in our brains saying, don't do that, you shouldn't do that, something really bad will happen. So we've all got to work quite hard on recognizing when that fear voice is talking to us, and say to it, okay, fear, I hear you, but that's just a possibility. And there are many other possibilities that could also happen. And so you can just slowly start to turn the volume down on that imposter syndrome voice. And there's just one other thing that's really important, which is that our neural pathways get more and more embedded over time. This is something to do with neuroplasticity that maybe you've heard about. So the more you tell yourself, I can't do this, or I'm rubbish, I'm crap at public speaking, I can't run 10K, the more you talk to yourself in that language, the more those neural pathways are becoming embedded, and the harder it is to change them. So my biggest advice is try not to talk to yourself in these certainties, and try to talk to yourself more in the language of maybe and possibility. Like, maybe I can't run that 10K, but maybe I should just give it a go because I'll be able to do 7, and then maybe next week I'll do 8, and the week after 9 and 10. So yeah, just change your language to yourself.
Oh, Mona, I think you're gearing up for a YouTube channel. I'd subscribe.
That being human stuff, okay, don't ask me to run a marathon because that's never going to happen, let alone walk a 1K. But that idea of putting yourself in a position where you're scared and you think everyone's looking at you, you've just got to remember that human beings are inherently selfish. People aren't looking at you, they're thinking about themselves. So think about the last time you went out. I know it's been a long time, when there was a group photo taken and everyone then huddles around, again, not social distancing, around a screen to look at the photo taken. Guarantee you everyone is looking at themselves in the photo, and if they look good to themselves, they will say that's a great shot, post it somewhere. If they don't like the way they look, they will say delete it, it's awful. Because people aren't looking at you, and you've just got to remember that actually going out there and just saying whatever, as long as it's kind of within a framework of being slightly smart, people aren't looking at you that in-depthly to think about what and critique everything you do. It's just remembering that it takes the pressure off. I know that when I started City Hive and I had to start doing panel discussions and speak more in public, I'd break out in a massive sweat before, and I'd really worry, and then I slowly learned that actually it's like the newspapers, and after an event, if you speak from the heart, people will remember, but you are yesterday's chip paper at the end of the day. Obviously not this event, because this is going to stay with everyone for the rest of their lives, but it's you've just got to remember that you're just you're just one atom in this whole spectrum of the universe, really. And then it kind of takes the pressure off, right?
So I want to do 2 things. Mona, there's a question there for you in the chat around anything specific around the strategies that people use when they're trying to do the relationship building. And then Charlotte, I also wanted to come to you for your final thoughts and your what you're going to choose to challenge yourself to do, because I didn't do that earlier. And then we are going to be wrapping up. So Mona first.
It's a really good question, and I would just really encourage you to think about how you connect with people. You can spend an hour having coffee with somebody, but did you really connect? And I would also encourage you to think about the person you're interacting with beyond their work persona. Try to understand what makes them tick as a whole. Is it charity work? Is it family? Like whatever it is. I feel like the people that I remember the most are the ones that really see me and really hear me, rather than just being a polite listener.
And Charlotte, your final thoughts?
Yeah, in terms of what I would like to challenge, and particularly my own kind of approach to diversity, I think it's something that we discussed in our pre-discussions of the panel, that diversity isn't necessarily obvious, that someone's or isolating experience isn't something visible. And I think that's really important when we're thinking about having different voices around the table and different perspectives, knowing that whilst you might feel very much on the sort of minority end of the spectrum, actually there's a lot more, particularly that you can find out if you do what Mona and Bev have advocated, which is really get to understand someone, hear them, create a personal connection. You'll realize that it's a lot more nuanced than us versus them. And I think that's something that I've always try and do, but which I think would benefit from a lot more effort behind.
Brilliant, thank you. So thank you everyone for being very open and frank. And to sum up, take minutes. You don't have to be Machiavellian, and and watch Working Girl. Those were the main things that I took away from this. So thank you everyone for joining us this evening. We're going to challenge ourselves to do more to support the talent that's coming up, and we would like you to think about having a look on our website, seeing the amazing stories from the game women, but also what you could do to challenge yourself, and to give you a bit of inspiration to play you out. I'm going to hope the tech is not going to fail. Here's a poem. Thank you everyone, and have a lovely
Many
evening.
people wonder where my secret lies. I'm not my lips. I'm a woman, phenomenally. I walk into a room just as cool as you please, and to a man the fellows stand or fall down on their knees. Then they swarm around me, a hive of honeybees. I say, it's the fire in my eyes, the flash of my teeth, the swing in my waist, the joy in my feet. I'm a woman, phenomenally. Men themselves have wondered what they see in me. They try so much, but they can't touch my inner mystery. When I try to show them, they say they still can't see. I say, it's in the arch of my back, the sun of my smile, the ride of my breasts, the grace of my style. I'm a woman, phenomenally. Now you understand just why my head's not bowed. I don't shout or jump about or have to talk real loud. When you see me passing, it ought to make you proud. I say it's in the click of my heels, the bend of my hair, the palms of my hands, the need for my care, because I'm a woman, phenomenal woman, all you women and me.
Thank you everyone. Have a lovely evening.